Senator Tom Cotton, how are you?
Hey, Dave. It's good to hear from you. Happy New Year's to you and all your listeners.
Happy New Year to you and your family. How's it feel to have a full family now?
It's a great blessing. As predicted by many friends, little Gabriel was more impressed with the wrapping and tissue paper on Christmas morning than the gifts.
I bet you that is the case. They find the boxes. You know, they like the boxes at that age. I know my kids did as far as that goes.
Well, yeah, since then he's certainly been enjoying all the gifts that family and friends gave to him. I noticed that all the gifts that come from people who don't have to care for him make a lot of noise.
That's typical.
That's the grandparents.
Did anybody give him one of those pianos yet where he can bang on it?
Yeah, he's had one of those for a while, unfortunately.
How about one of those little pop things you push around the floor and it pops everywhere it goes?
Oh yeah,
he doesn't have one of those yet, but he's not able to crawl or walk yet, so he wouldn't be able to use it anyway.
All right, well let's get to the subjects at hand. You know, you start a new year, and what happens? The President of the United States comes out, starts talking about, we got to stop all of these mass shootings, so I'm going to do something that will have nothing to do with the mass shootings. I'm going to have some executive orders passed out that says, we're going to go after, quote, loopholes in the gun shows. We're going to make more people have to fill out more paperwork. Your thoughts on it, Senator?
Well, Dave, as you point out, the President's proposed executive actions on gun control would be largely ineffective. I would argue they're also unconstitutional, and they're a distraction from his own failures. Unconstitutional because in our system of government, only the Congress can change the law. It's also beginning to push up against the constitutional limits that the Supreme Court has recognized under the Second Amendment and every Arkansan's right to keep and bear arms. They're ineffective because the proposals that he's made, as so many other times has been the case, largely would not stop any of the mass murders, the terrorist attacks we've seen. For instance, in San Bernardino last month, the terrorists there were using weapons that were largely already banned under state law. If they were banned under state law, then federal law wouldn't have done anything more. Because terrorists and mass murderers typically aren't going to walk into Walmart and buy their firearms there. They're going to use a straw purchaser or going to get them on the black market. And finally, these proposals are a distraction away from his own failures. On the law enforcement front, prosecutions under existing gun laws have actually declined under the Obama administration. And on the terrorism front, President Obama's failures in Iraq and Syria have allowed the Islamic State to grow in power and influence, attracting adherents all around the world who it inspires or even directs to commit the kind of attacks we've seen in San Bernardino and Paris. So I think that we should focus on the underlying problems that we have, prosecutions that are going to keep felons from getting their hands on guns, and fighting back against terrorist groups like the Islamic State where they are, so we put them on the defensive.
Well, I had some people call in, and there's the electorate this year, as you probably know, because you get plenty of emails and texts and letters and calls at your office. They're angry this year, and I think they're more angry with Obama and the Democrats than they really are with the Republicans. But they're so angry that it's bled over into everything. And so I was hearing people yesterday say, well, if they had any backbone, they'd impeach the president. And, of course, I just shake my head when I hear stuff like that. Could you explain to my listeners why that's not a good play?
Well, Dave, first off, that is crazy talk, because then Joe Biden would be president. I agree that many Arkansans are deeply frustrated with business as usual in Washington. And I can sympathize because I campaigned for the Senate against business as usual. And while we've made some changes over the last year with Republicans in charge of the Senate, say we haven't made enough changes. Just look at the big, massive spending bill that just passed the Congress last year. $1.1 trillion in spending, revealed about 48 hours in advance. No one could possibly have understood all of the measures in that bill. And while there were some good measures, such as increased defense spending or repealing some onerous regulations that impacted Arkansas farmers and ranchers, in my opinion, the bad outweighed the good. It continues to increase deficit spending. It vastly expanded the number of visas for low-skilled workers at a time when people with high school degrees are struggling to get a job and seeing stagnant wages. That's just the kind of example of business as usual that we continue to see too much of in Washington. And now, in part, that's because the Democrats and Barack Obama have been very obstructionist over the last year, wanting to thwart the will of the people expressed in the last election. Therefore, it's incumbent upon us to channel our frustration in this next election to elect a Republican president who's going to work with a Republican Congress to get the economy moving again, to get people back to work, and to keep America safe.
Well, you guys did something great just before you guys left for Christmas break, and that was repealing Obamacare and, of course, defunding Planned Parenthood, and you had to use budget reconciliation to do that. But I was reminded the other day from a friend of mine that that's exactly how they got Obamacare through the Senate with the Democrats. They used budget reconciliation.
Right, Dave. So for your listeners who don't know the arcana of Senate procedures, most actions in the Senate take 60 votes. But the budget reconciliation rules allow a simple majority to pass any bill that would have certain consequences for tax and spending policy, as Obamacare clearly does. And as you say, Obamacare originally passed in part using those rules. The House of Representatives just passed the Senate bill yesterday, and now it's going to go to the president for his certain veto. However, it is important that we show what kind of alternative we would propose if we're entrusted next year, not just with the Congress, but with the presidency as well. That we would repeal Obamacare, that we would roll back the kind of government-centered, one-size-fits-all health care plan that Obamacare has created, creating vast costs for thousands of Arkansans and millions of Americans, and replace it with health care that empowers individuals and families and doctors to make the right choices for themselves.
Well, the Speaker of the House said they're getting ready to start work on that. I'm excited about that. And I know there's a lot of people say, why didn't you do anything like this earlier? And the simple answer is easy. You couldn't.
Well, it is a good example of the difference a year can make with Democrats in control of the Senate under Harry Reid and now Republicans in control of the Senate. By our ability to set the agenda and have a majority where we can pass measures with a simple majority, we have brought up many important bills, some of which have passed into law, some of which the president has vetoed, that helps frame the national debate we'll have in this election year. And it will help clarify the choices that the American people face in this most consequential election.
Am I right in saying you knew you would lose these battles, but the object is to win the war? And by losing the battles, you get it out in front of the voters so they can see exactly what the party wants to do if we get a Republican in the White House.
Well, Dave, that's partly right. Now, sometimes, though, it's important to call the president's bluff, that he makes veto threats that he, in the end, does not follow through on. So, for example, the National Defense Authorization Act, which I helped to write on the Armed Services Committee, once again includes very strong measures to protect against the president closing Guantanamo Bay and transferring all those terrorists to the mainland of the United States. He's threatened to veto that legislation on numerous occasions, yet he signed it once again. So you're partly right that we want to help frame the debate for the American people in the very consequential upcoming election we have so they can see what kind of choice they face. But also, sometimes you just have to call the president's bluff and force him to make a choice of whether he wants to veto critical legislation.
That's exactly so in other words, right. Don't just allow him to intimidate you and push you around all the time.
Of course not.
All right. Last question for you. There's strange goings on in North Korea again. They say they tried to set off a hydrogen bomb. Everybody says it wasn't powerful enough to be a hydrogen bomb. Bottom line is, I think they tried to set one off. It just didn't work exactly the way they wanted to. This precedent makes things very, very nervous, people nervous along the Pacific Rim, Seoul, Korea, Tokyo, Japan. It should even make China nervous, I would think. This is a regime that is just wacky. And how do we deal with them?
Well, Dave, I think it's important to step back and not get lost in the details of this debate. The White House has focused on the details to distract away from the overall failure. Whether they detonated a hydrogen bomb, whether they had another detonation of a uranium bomb or something in between, a uranium-enhanced bomb with, say, hydrogen or tritium in its core, to me, is largely just a matter of details. The really important fact is they had yet another nuclear test. And the last test they had, they got away with largely unscathed. There were no additional countermeasures taken by the Obama administration. We cannot stand idly by while North Korea, an outlaw regime run by totalitarian communist madman, continues to develop nuclear weapons at the pace, by some estimates, of 15 to 20 additional ones a year, because we have tens of thousands of our own troops in South Korea and Japan and Guam, hundreds of millions of our allies in the region, and, according to the testimony of the Northern Command commander, North Korea is probably capable of hitting the United States with a ballistic missile tipped with a nuclear warhead. So we need to be much stronger in pushing back against North Korea's nuclear test. We need to finally conclude the agreement with North Korea or South Korea to include ballistic missile systems on their territory. We need to seriously reconsider redeploying our own nuclear missiles into South Korea, and we need to impose much more serious sanctions on North Korea's illicit activities all around the world. That is the only access they have to hard currency. We can't let this test go unresponded to, as Barack Obama did in 2013.
Yeah, I agree with you, because if you don't respond to them, they see it as weakness. They see what we've done with Iran, and they don't think the same way we do. I mean, they really, really don't. They don't think the way we do. They got a head of state there that lets his people eat dirt to try to survive. These are not just normal folks that we're dealing with, and I had a gentleman on yesterday from the Heritage Foundation that said that they need to send some kind of measure over there that just says if you put a missile up on a pad and it looks like it's going to be launched, we're going to launch some things at you.
You know, Dave, I spent about 4 days in South Korea, and I even went to the DMZ on the border of South Korea and North Korea in August, talking to U.S. Forces Korea, and it's an incredibly tense situation there. You know, our forces have been based in Korea for 60 years. They, by and large, live a garrison type of life, the way troops would at, say, Little Rock Air Force Base or Fort Campbell in Tennessee, where I was based. But they have to be ready to fight a total war at a moment's notice, because they never know what might happen with North Korea. That's why we have to remain postured in a very strong fashion. We have to be very supportive of South Korea and Japan to encourage them to continue to overcome some of their historic differences, to present a united front that North Korea will not be allowed to take any kind of military action, nuclear or conventional, against the United States or against our allies in the region.
Well, Senator, I asked for 10. I've taken more than that. I appreciate your time. Next time that you're in the area, come on into the studio and let's talk about what the Republicans need to do after they get the White House to get our military where it needs to be and get our foreign policy where it needs to be so this country will be safe again.
Well, thanks very much, Dave. I appreciate it. Happy New Year again.
Same to you. Thank you very
Tom.
much. Senator Tom Cotton here on the Dave Elswick Show.